I mean, yeah, I certainly don't need my 71st child, but of course, this woman that's expecting next month, it's her first child. So for her, she doesn't care how many children I have. She wants her one.
What's your relationship like with the majority of these women after you?
Well, you're talking around 70 women, so there's going to be varied relationships. Some I'm quite close with, some I don't know very well. Some of them I met once, some of them I've never met, so it varied depending on the families. But I do think that even the ones that I don't see often, there's a lot of love. I mean, certainly they are in love with their child, and they see a little of me in that child. So I get to be the recipient of a lot of love as well. They know how much joy I brought them.
Is there a contract in place or something? Are there responsibilities that are kind of outlined that you're giving them your sperm, but then afterwards, are there certain expectations, or is it just, I'm going to be however you want me to be, however I want to be, however the child wants me to be involved in their life?
I have a lot of flexibility. So for a lot of the children, I'm always leaving it up to the mom. So the moms have 100% of the decision making. Some of them don't want me involved at all, but sometimes that changes, and then they want me to play a bigger role, and then I try and step up to the plate and do my best to, play a positive role in their life. So it's dynamic; it's changing all the time. There's also the moms that wanted me to play a role, and then they change their mind. So it goes back and forth, and I always leave it up to the moms so that I'll play whatever role that they want. Obviously, when the kids are older, they have different views. I mean, what if I have a preteen and they're not getting along with the mom, and then they want to say, listen, I want to live with dad? Obviously, that could pose a challenge. It would be a difficult decision, but I think ultimately I would always try and honor the mother's wishes. Obviously, that goes the same if one of the mothers die, right? So ultimately, I probably would have rights to the child, but I would just try and honor and respect the mother's wishes. As far as there being a contract, I never required a contract, but sometimes they come to me with a contract that they want me to sign, and I'll just sign whatever contract that they're comfortable with. In the end, ultimately, we never use the contracts, so I'm happy for them to, if they change their mind in the future and then they want to change the contract, that's okay. However, some countries require a contract. So I have a few kids in Israel, and it's required that you come up with a contract. So it wasn't almost a contract that the mothers requested, but in order to comply with the law, we had to sign contracts. And then sometimes it was interesting to see what they put in the contract. But the vast majority of the moms, probably 90%, there was no paperwork signed at all.
So do you view yourself, and I'm sure the answer to this isn't a black and white, as categorical a question as I'm making it sound, but do you view yourself more as their father or as a sperm donor who gets to know them as well sometimes?
Yeah, ultimately in the end, that mostly depends on the moms and what role they see me in. So some of the kids call me Ari, and some of them call me Dad. Most of them do call me Dad. And then some of them don't call me at all. There's some kids that I've never met, right? So it varies. A lot of the times there's two moms obviously in the picture, and one of them sort of plays the dominant, maybe aggressive type father type role, where there's maybe a stud and a femme in the relationship. So one does seem a little bit more masculine and maybe is more of a father figure. Of course, there's also heterosexual couples that I helped where the children already have a father. So, obviously I'm not playing a role of raising that child. But a lot of times there's families, even if I have nothing to do with them, maybe that they have the child be close with their siblings and their brothers and sisters. So sometimes if they're out of state, even if I don't get together that often, a lot of the kids, sometimes the moms reach out to me. They were a little too old to maybe have a larger family, but they don't want the kid to be an only child. So they're very excited by the prospect of having their child foster relationships with their brothers and sisters. So some of the kids get together with their brothers and sisters a lot more often than maybe they would with their father. So some of the kids call me Dad, some of them call me Ari, but most of them call me Father. Yes.
Ari, how do you keep track of 70 kids? I mean, it's tough to keep track of 70 friends. At least for me, if I even have 70 people I'd really call true friends. So to have 70 kids, even with varying relationships, how do you kind of cognitively and emotionally have the bandwidth for that? Especially when they get older and there's potential for perhaps a more in-depth relationship of sorts.
Certainly, when my boss found out how many kids I had, she called me into her office, and she's almost more like a mother than she is a boss. And that was her take. She said, "Listen, the kids are young now, so they scrape their knee, you give them a lolly, and most problems can be solved with a little bit of candy." But as they get older, those relationships and those problems are a lot more complex, and maybe they won't be as easy. Sometimes you're overwhelmed with diaper changes, and you think, "Oh well." When they're infants, that's the hardest, but there's light at the end of the tunnel when they're 2 or 3 years old, and then, they'll be more independent. They can dress themselves. Things would get easier, but then it also can sometimes get more complicated. So she was concerned that maybe when these kids get older, it'll be a little bit more challenging. And I'm sure that will be the case. I suspect that it's just a matter of time before some of the children may resent maybe the fact that I have so many children. But in the end, ultimately, I think I'm not really replacing a full-time father. What I'm trying to do my best at replacing is maybe the mother's having to use an anonymous frozen sperm bank where the donor is completely anonymous and the child will never know who the father is. So when you look at it from that aspect, obviously it's not just the money angle. A lot of these women just didn't feel comfortable with the choosing who the father of their child's going to be. Maybe one of the most important decisions that they'll make in their entire life, and then having to make that decision without even ever meeting who that person's going to be. So you're looking at a piece of paper and you see very, very superficial things. And maybe you see, a little essay that the person wrote, which could have been copied and pasted. I mean, you almost really don't know the person at all. You can't have a cup of coffee with the person. Whereas here, it's not just the mother that's struggling with that decision, but I think children struggle for the rest of their lives when they have this anonymous donor and they don't know who their father is, and they look around and they see men and they say, maybe that's my dad, and I think they have identity issues.
That's a really interesting vantage point. So from your perspective then, if some of these kids do end up being resentful that how did you have 100 kids? I'm just one of 100 kids, for example. That makes a lot of sense. You're saying, well, what would the alternative have been? The alternative would have been kind of you don't exist, obviously, or you'd have an anonymous sperm donor that you'd potentially never even have the capability of meeting. So you trust that in a way they'll be able to grapple with that and come to terms with the fact, well, yeah, I guess I'd rather have a father that is not anonymous than an anonymous sperm donor that I'd never even have the opportunity of meeting and then developing a connection with. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but the vast majority of the donor conceived children that were polled, I think certainly would have preferred that they had known the child. That being said, I think the vast majority of donor conceived children would also prefer that their donor father didn't have so many kids so that they'd be able to foster a stronger relationship, because a lot of times the donor allows their identity to be known after the child turns 18, and then the child finds out that they have all these brothers and sisters, and even if they wanted to foster a relationship with their parent, it's not as feasible because they have to share their time among so many brothers and sisters. But in some ways, I think perhaps what they're losing from having a full-time father or even a father that they could be super close with, maybe they're gaining so many brothers and sisters, and they'd be able to, have close relationships with them. Of course, those relationships will be for life, whereas a parent relationship is, only until they're 40 or 50 years old. Obviously the kids that I'm expecting in this upcoming year, I'm not going to be there for them their whole life, but their brothers and sisters will be.
Do you get pride when you see your kids? Like, do you look at these 70 kids and do you look at them as you would a traditional child? I mean, you do have a traditional child. And when I say traditional child, I don't mean to be cavalier there. I mean, you have a kid who I believe you said is 15?
16. He'll be 17 September 12th. And, it's funny because you asked me, how do I keep track of 70 kids? And then obviously I have some more on the way. And the truth is, I have 70 students a semester, but at the end of the 12-week semester, I do know all of their names, and I'm sure you have 70 patients, and you probably have close relationships with many of them as well. I think just the fact that I have 70 children doesn't necessarily mean that I don't know their names or birthdays or know their mom's names, and don't feel close to them.
How does your 16-year-old feel about this? And do you have a different relationship with him than you do with a lot of the other kids?
Yeah. Speaking to your other question, I just realized, I'm not 100% sure I'm doing the right thing. Obviously, time will tell. I certainly feel that way now, but I understand I'm basically making it up as I go along. So it's very possible that mistakes would have been made. And, but I'm doing my best. Certainly, it feels like I'm doing the right thing in my heart of hearts. And certainly seeing the joy of the moms and of their and of our children. Do I take pride in the children? Obviously, of course I do. Not will I take pride, but I do. Just even every year I have graduations. Of course, it's just mostly kindergarten graduations or lower school graduations, middle school graduations. They're not major accomplishments, but I look forward, and I'm sure many of my kids will go on to do great.